Good afternoon from Los Angeles and welcome to Stock Market Today, sponsored by Interactive Brokers. On the show, we're going to be breaking down the chart action of Apple as well as New Oriental Education and Luckin Coffee, set to issue its quarterly report Wednesday morning. But first, let's take a look at those major indexes. It's Alyssa Corum here with Justin Nielsen. And Justin, it was a very strong day in the market today. The NASDAQ finishing up about 2%, the S&P 500 and Dow also finishing strongly higher. Very headline-driven market as of late, and today the headlines were in the bulls' favor.
Yes, exactly. So trade talks have been the big thing, and as has happened a number of times before, the can got kicked down the road. So instead of that September 1st deadline, a number of tariffs were knocked to mid-December, and that particularly benefited a lot of things that have to do with holiday shopping. So
electronics and toys.
Consumer electronics, toys, clothing, Apple, they were all up, today. So it's almost like Christmas came early for those guys.
Right, and we will talk about Apple here in just a little bit, but touching a little bit more on this technical action that we're seeing. We'll take a look at the chart of the NASDAQ. We are, even though we saw a really strong day today, a little bit of resistance here at that 50-day line.
Potential. We don't know yet. Right now the NASDAQ closed, it looks like it closed above the 50-day line. The S&P 500 a little bit below the 50-day line. We'll see how it handles itself at this area. 8,000 level has also been an area for the NASDAQ that has been problematic. But right now this looks like it has all the makings of a follow-through day. So that's where we are up more than 1%, 1.25% on heavier volume. We'll see what the final volume figures look like. But right now, this is a day 6 follow-through day. It looks strong. That's kind of your cue to, maybe start, tiptoeing in the waters again. Keep in mind, we did have that vertical violation earlier. That when we slice through the 50-day very dramatically, that tends to make some of the first follow-through days not work quite as well.
And we saw that twice in the fourth quarter. There were two
in November,
failed follow-throughs.
Yes, exactly. Very early on in November and a little bit later on in November. Now in May, that was kind of a vertical violation as well, but it was a very headline-driven market, and trade talks in that case made it so that the first follow-through day worked in that case.
Right, which speaking of, everyone should still be on guard, even though if we do see, this new uptrend continue higher here, there could still be negative headlines that could get in the way.
We're not out of the woods yet with, nothing's been decided. It's just, at this point, it's like we're just postponing it. So the other point here to realize is one of the reasons why we don't plunge all of our money in at once is because these can fail. And so you just want to be very careful, be doing a little bit of buying, but not necessarily, going on margin like today.
Yeah, and especially if the volatility continues, more important than ever to make sure you are following those proper buy and sell rules.
So now this whole time we've been looking at stocks that have had stronger relative strength lines, and the stocks that looked like they were setting up. We were keeping our watch list very fresh, and this is why, because the market can turn so quickly and without warning. I mean, this happened in the morning. It was looking bad, and then all of a sudden the headline came out and things looked completely different.
Yep, always got to be prepared. And let's take a look at Apple. We did mention it being one of the big beneficiaries of the trade headlines today, gaining over 4% in above average volume, rebounding off of its 50-day moving average.
And of course, as Apple goes, so do a lot of the indexes. This is one of the big positive contributors to the Dow Jones Industrials today. It's a big component of both the NASDAQ and the S&P 500. And so this made a big difference for those indexes. However, you do have to keep in mind that Apple is not the same Apple that it was years ago. Its earnings have slowed. It's still,
the fundamental story is weakened.
Very, very, very different. The year-over-year earnings have declined. The sales last quarter were only up 1%. Revenues year over year, and before that the sales were actually down a little bit from the previous, same quarter previous year.
That's right, and the trade war is still definitely uncertain when it comes to how that factors into Apple's future. But if you look a little bit further down the road in 2020, it's expected to start picking up on the earnings again with 5G phones coming out. That could spark a little bit more iPhone buying.
Yes, and of course, there's always the transition to services, over
that
hardware that Apple has been really talking about for a long time. And so, as we see further earnings reports, we'll see how that transition is going.
That we will. And now let's touch on New Oriental Education, which gained over 3% today, making a nice technical move here, Justin. So why don't you go ahead and explain the kind of move that we saw with New Oriental Education, because it's not your typical base breakout, but a very interesting chart.
Yeah, so yesterday, Ed and I were talking about Roku and Match as examples of what happens post-earnings. And so this is just another one of those examples. So Roku, of course, was doing very well. Match was kind of pulling back. EDU was also pulling back after its earnings report. And so now this kind of gives you another opportunity, because now the strength is coming back in. And if you drew a line down, you could see this was a downtrend line, and now it's broken back above that. And so that can kind of give you an alternative entry, and that's what we were seeing in EDU today.
All right, and last but not least, let's take a look at recent IPO Luckin Coffee, which is going to be reporting its earnings Wednesday morning. Now, analysts are expecting another quarter of losses here, but revenue is expected to come in at over 130 million, which would be almost double what it saw in the last quarter, and that huge growth is expected to continue. So it seems like we're still in the really early innings here for Luckin.
Absolutely. And when you're in the very early earnings, that's where a lot of times the sales growth can be more informative of
exactly.
the potential for the stock. And that's what people are playing off of. That's what investors are looking at. And so this will be the first earnings report since the IPO for Luckin in mid-May. And you just have to understand the story here is that they are opening stores like crazy. So they basically opened up over 2,000 stores in the last 18 months, and that's why they're seeing, this phenomenal growth. And so those, the revenue percentage changes are just ridiculous. They're like, not triple digit, they're like quadruple, and more in terms of the growth. But these are not small numbers anymore. As you mentioned, the last quarter it was about 70 million. Now we're looking at 100. These are starting to get to be some sizable numbers, and they have a very different model than Starbucks, as opposed to, why don't you sit down, write your novel, while you
spend all day here.
Exactly. This is more, hey, get your coffee and go. There's a lot of more pickup, delivery. That's what's happening at Luckin, and that's why they can open up these stores very, very quickly, because they don't have to have that lot of space for these.
Right. Interesting. Well, in terms of the chart, it has an IPO base with a buy point at 2606, but investors could also use this handle type area with 2722 as a potential entry, although if this blows away tomorrow with the earnings, we could see a gap up potentially.
We just had a podcast, a few weeks ago on this, that was talking about how these IPOs, because they have such low float, they can often, that means low supply. And so if there's a lot of demand coming in, that can really push the stock up very quickly. So it's just good to have this on your radar, be watching it at the early morning hours to see how it's trading. And this could be a potential breakout or breakaway gap, as happens a lot of times with these IPOs.
And in that case, we would use the open price as the buy point.
Exactly. And this is where we start looking at that first 1 minute bar, that first 5 minute bar.
Charts.
How can it, cross in that first hour, what kind of trading it looks like. So those are some things that if you were going to play this now, keep in mind it's a little bit more volatile. It's not for everyone. If you're going to be retiring next year, maybe this isn't appropriate for your portfolio.
All right. Well, we will definitely be keeping tabs on that with earnings on the table tomorrow morning. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. And in case you missed it, we want to let you know that we do have another episode of our Investing Strategies show out now. And this week, it's all about the software sector. We break down how you determine sector leadership. That's something very important. You want to be buying stocks in the leading groups. We also take a look at a few individual names, and then also another way to play the group through a cloud computing ETF. So again, make sure you check that out by going to investors.com/investing strategies. And that's it for today, Justin.
Okay. Let's do it again tomorrow.
Yes, we will see you right back here tomorrow, everyone. Thanks so much for watching.